Bismillah, alhamdulillah, salatu wassalamu ala rasulillah wa ala alihi wa sahbihi wa man wala, thumma amma ba'd, to proceed. So I will, we will go over parts of the introduction. He said here, Alhamdulillah, al-Wahid al-Ahad, al-Qayyum al-Samad, al-Latif al-Qarib, الذي أمطر سرائر العارفين كرائم الكلم من غمائم الحكم وألاح لهم لوائح القدم في صفائح العدم ودلهم على أقرب السبل إلى المنهاج الأول وردهم من تفرق العلل إلى عين الأزل وبث فيهم ذخائره وأودعهم سرائره وأشهد أن لا إله إلا الله وحده لا شريك له الأول الآخر الظاهر الباطن الذي مد ظل التلوين على الخليفة مدا طويلا ثم جعل شمس التمكين لصفوته عليه دليلا ثم قبض ظل التفرقة عنهم إليه قبضا يسيرا وصلاته وسلامه على صفيه الذي أقسم به في إقامة حقه محمد وآله كثيرا. In the name of God, the Beneficent, the Merciful, praise be to God, the One, the Unique, the Supreme, the Ultimate, the Benevolent, the Intimate, He who has showered the hearts of the knowing or the knowers, al-Arifin, with noble words from the haze of wisdom and beamed upon them the ancient tablets from slabs of nothingness and guided them to the nearest pathways leading to the first scheme and brought them back from the diversity of causes to the source of eternity. Al-Azaliyya is eternity without beginning. Al-Abadiyya is eternity without ending. And who has revealed to them His powers and entrusted them with His mysteries. I declare that there is no God but Allah alone and with no associate. He is the beginning and the end, the visible and the hidden, who has spread out diversity far among His creation. Then for the chosen ones made the sunshine of enablement a testimony to Him, then effortlessly lifted the darkness of dissension away from them. May His plentiful blessing and peace be upon His favored one who swore by Him to establish His truth, Muhammad and his whole family. Whenever he mentions dissension, it means tafarruq. Tafarruq is basically it is basically the opposite of togetherness. The opposite of togetherness. Togetherness is when your whole, which is your body, your mind, your heart, are all together with the purpose of your creation. Tafarruq is when you are basically spread out, when you are disunited internally and dissociated from your purpose of creation. Internally, you have no wholeness, you have no togetherness. Your mind, your body, your heart are in different places. You're distractible, you're not together inside, and you're not together with Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, al-jam'iyya ala Allah azza wa jalla, you're not with Allah, so you lost that togetherness. And once you lose togetherness with Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, once you lose your connection with Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, you will not be able to stay together internally. You will be torn apart internally. Your mind will be in one place, your heart will be in one place, your mind itself will not be together. So your thoughts will be conflicting, your thoughts will be contradicting, your thoughts, not just in your mind and your heart, but your mind itself, just your thoughts will be in many different places. And not only that they are in many different places, they pull you apart, they tear you apart because they are conflicting and they are contradicting. How could you find togetherness? How could you find togetherness if you have not realized your purpose in creation, your purpose of existence, your raison d'etre, your justification of existence? How could you be together if you have not come to terms with the purpose of your existence? there is nothing that will keep you together. You know, the pursuits in this life, the wants, the desires in this life, thoughts, philosophies, opinions, you know, the doctrines, schools, they all tear you apart. They all pull you apart. They all cause you this tafarruq, which is this disunity, lack of wholeness, lack of togetherness, which makes people jittery, which makes people anxious, worried, discontent. You will never be able to find contentment until you are together, you are whole, and you're also whole within, you know, the realm of, or within basically the scheme that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala created you for. You're connected to your Creator, you are cognizant of His desires, His wants of you, and you give them precedence over anything else. And Allah is one, and that oneness will reflect on you, the oneness of Allah. Because keep in mind, if you give precedence to Allah's speech, if you give precedence to Allah's wants of you over your own wants, desires of you over your own desires, Allah is one or not? Allah is one. Does Allah ever conflict with Himself or contradict Himself? Absolutely not. So that will bring you that togetherness and that wholeness when you receive your guidance from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, and when your life is for the sake of Allah, and when your thoughts are not given precedence, or you do not put your thoughts forward before the guidance of Allah. لا تقدموا بين يدي الله ورسوله. Do not put your thoughts forward before Allah's guidance and His Messenger's guidance. So that is that's what they mean when he says, when they talk about this tafarruq, or this unity. And then Imam al-Harawi said, وَبَعْدُ فَإِنَّ جَمَاعَةً مِنَ الرَّاغِبِينَ فِي الْوُقُوفِ عَلَى مَنَازِلِ السَّائِرِينَ إِلَى الْحَقِّ عَزَّ اسْمُهُ مِنَ الْفُقَرَاءِ مِنْ أَهْلِ هَرَاءٍ والغرباء طال علي مسألتهم إياي زمانا أن أبين لهم في معرفتها بيانا يكون على معالمها عنوانا. A group of those desiring to learn about the stations of the wayfarers toward the true one, may his name be glorified, ascetics from among the people of Herat and strangers for some time have been requesting me to elucidate to them those stations by revealing their characteristics. Okay, so you will find that Imam ibn Qudama also, Imam ibn Qudama's introduction in the beginning of this book, we will read Imam ibn Qudama's introduction, and he will also say that some people asked me to write this book, as if they are apologizing for writing a book. And that's pretty interesting, because there is something to learn here from them. Not only that that this used to be their custom, as if they need to provide an apology. This is why I'm writing a book. I know I'm not worth it. I know I'm not deserving of writing a book. I know that there may not be that much that I could say or could contribute or could add, but they have been asking me, and I felt that I should respond to their request. And that's really beautiful. And our righteous predecessors, humbleness is the essence of scholarship. Humbleness is the essence of the scholarship. Once a scholar becomes arrogant, then he's not a scholar to begin with. Or he will have this scholarship stripped off of him. He will be punished. And even if he will be recognized by the people as a scholar, he will not be recognized in al-Mala' al-A'la as a scholar. He will not be recognized among the noble angels as a scholar, and certainly, most importantly, he will not be recognized by Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala as a scholar. So he's providing a reason. Okay, so it is like they need to provide a reason why they're writing a book. Not only that they provided a reason, sometimes they did not write books. Like who would be more deserving to write a book than Imam Ahmad, for instance? He wrote a few treatises on the small issues for his acquaintances, but he refused to write a book. A book meaning a book of his own. Musnad al-Imam Ahmad is the greatest book of Sunnah, the largest book, the largest collection of ahadith. But this is not like I'm writing a book. I'm not really writing my opinions here. All I'm doing is reporting from the Prophet ﷺ what he said. I'm collecting what the Prophet ﷺ said, and he refused to write. And he also refused that his disciples, his students, would write his statements or his opinions. And when we come to the fiqh session, we will talk about how the Hanbali madhab survived despite Imam Ahmad's strictness in not writing any books on fiqh, and his strict emphasis to his disciples to not write down his opinions and not write down his fiqhi thought. So sometimes they did not write, and sometimes they wrote and then they burned their books. So Sufyan al-Thawri, one of the greatest of the scholars, Imam Ahmad used to be considered none superior to Sufyan al-Thawri in terms of his contemporaries. Sufyan al-Thawri was a contemporary of Imam Abu Hanifa and Imam Malik. So when Imam Ahmad puts Sufyan al-Thawri above all of his contemporaries, that is huge. Sufyan al-Thawri is one of al-Fuqaha al-Sab'a, because before the madhahib became known as four madhahib, there used to be different madhahib, many other madhahib. But the Fuqaha al-Sab'a are those four in addition to Sufyan al-Thawri, al-Awza'i, and al-Layth ibn Sa'd. So Sufyan al-Thawri is one of al-Fuqaha al-Sab'a, the four and the three who are very comparable to the four, and they were contemporaries of the four as well. Sufyan al-Thawri came one day and shredded all of his books, about 1,000 small volumes, and he threw them away. He shredded them and threw them away. Not only this, Sufyan al-Thawri told Ammar ibn Sayf, one of his students, when I die, if you find any of my writings, burn them. And he, was dutiful to his master, so he did burn them after Sufyan al-Thawri died. Anything that he found, he would burn it. Why? Because it's a responsibility. To write a book is a responsibility. To leave behind you a legacy that and opinions and contribution to the understanding of Islam, the deen of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, is an enormous responsibility. It's an enormous burden. So Sufyan al-Thawri did not want to come on the Day of Judgment and find the unpredictable. Maybe his thoughts were wrong. Maybe his opinions were misguided. And they were not. We know that he's one of our great imams. But this is as much fear as they had in their hearts of this responsibility to write, to speak, to contribute, to basically formulate an opinion is a responsibility. and then to share it is an enormous risk, an enormous liability, because people will be, even at a much lower level, you see, when we sit down and talk with each other, when we have like gatherings, at MSA or whatever, we have gatherings and we sit down and talk and exchange ideas, you are liable. Whatever you will say, you are now liable. Once it comes out of your mouth, you are liable before Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. That is not to discourage you from relating, reporting, conveying the message, but so that we humble ourselves, so that when we share opinions, we verify them before we share them, and we attribute them to the scholars from which we learn those opinions. And then we don't act haughty, and we don't act like this is it. And I am telling you because I know that this is the final word, this is the final verdict on this matter, because this is what I believe to be correct. And that's unacceptable, particularly of people in our caliber. And if we are to learn from those scholars, we must learn humbleness before we basically learn from the information they shared with us. So Imam al-Ansari said that they asked me to write for them. They asked me to clarify for them those stations of al-Sā'irīn, the Wayfarers. These are the spiritual stations, and he will basically address 100 of those stations. 100 stations of the Wayfarers who seek proximity to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, nearness to Allah, and the pleasure of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. So he said, after he explained that they asked him to do that, he said that he made istikhara, and then he embarked on the mission. And then he said, I was afraid that if I were to expound on Abu Bakr al-Kattani's words, namely that there are 1,000 stages of light and darkness between the servant and God, I would have overstretched both for myself and for them. So he basically elucidated those 100 stations, and he said, don't think it's too many, there is many more, but I'm afraid that it will be too long for the readership. And that's wise, and you will also find that those 100 stations, sometimes they overlap. And it is not about the number of stations. It is not even about knowing the stations, because many of the greater ascetics and the most righteous, and the more righteous for sure, of the Sahaba and the Tabi'een, more righteous than Shaykh al-Islam Abdullah al-Ansari al-Harawi, more guided than Shaykh al-Islam Abdullah al-Ansari al-Harawi, are the Sahaba and many of the Tabi'een and Tabi'een are righteous predecessors. For sure we know that, al-Khulafa al-Arba'a and al-Ashra al-Mubashirin bil-Jannah and, most of Ahl Badr and so on, those are more guided, more righteous, more spiritual than Shaykh al-Islam al-Harawi and than many of the latter scholars. But had you asked them, name for me the stations to God Almighty, they may have not been able to tell you what the stations are. So to basically occupy those stations, you don't need to be aware of them. You don't need to be aware of them. You can occupy them without being mentally aware of them. It is not about academics. It is not about your knowledge. It is not about the information that you possess, but it is about your ability to seek nearness to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. your resolve, your strength, your basically piety, and Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala will bring you closer. He will carry you to Him without you knowing any of those stations. So don't be caught up with the information and trying to just like memorize and to be precise in sorting things out and memorizing. Make this more of a spiritual journey. The clarification of Shaykh al-Islam al-Ansari will basically raise our recognition of those concepts. Let them raise your recognition of the concepts. The concept of yaqadha, wakefulness, heedfulness versus heedlessness. The concept of inaba, to be oft returning to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. The concept of muraqaba, concept of watchfulness, to be watchful of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala all the time. These are concepts. It is much more important to raise the awareness, your awareness of those concepts, your recognition, the recognition of your heart of those concepts, than to memorize their names. Because the heart can recognize the concepts and can remember them and can then, motivate you to occupy those stations and to transcend to those concepts without you ever being able to verbalize them, memorize them, or verbalize them. So he said, I will go over 100 of them. There is a lot more. Al-Kattani rahimahullah said there are 1,000 phases between the servant and his Lord. Then he mentions a statement of al-Junayd rahimahullah. And al-Junayd is Sayyid al-Taifa. He is basically the foremost in this path. Or at least according to many scholars, he used to be considered the foremost in this path, and the master of the group of the ascetics and the seekers. So al-Junayd rahimahullah, and I have a statement here from Ibn Taymiyyah rahimahullah about al-Junayd and about this strain of Sufism, this strain of pure Sufism, like the strain of al-Junayd. But first, Shaykh al-Islam al-Harawi says, وَقَدْ قَالَ الْجُنَيْدِ قَدْ يُنْقَلُ الْعَبْدُ مِنْ حَالٍ إِلَى حَالٍ أَرْفَعَ مِنْهَا وَقَدْ بَقِيَ عَلَيْهِ مِنَ الَّتِي نُقِلَ عَنْهَا بَقِيَّةٌ فَيُشْرِفُ عَلَيْهَا مِنَ الْحَالَةِ الثَّانِيَةِ فَيُصْلِحُهَا. He says, the servant may be transported. He does not, it's not like the servant may move. You cannot move. You can't on your own move from a station to another station. You get moved, you get carried, you get transported. So he said a person, the servant may be transported from one station to a higher one, though a remnant of the previous state may have been left to him. Then from his second state he would oversee what has been left and rectify it. He would oversee what has been left and rectify it. Absolutely. Meaning that you move from one station to the next, or you are moved from one station to the next. Don't think that you transcended the previous station, that this is work that has been done. And if you think it is work that has been done, you are deluded. And you're arrogant. In other words, Shaykh Islam al-Harawi then says, وعندي أن العبد لا يصح له مقام حتى يرتفع عنه ثم يشرف عليه فيصححه. To me, a servant has no valid standing until he rises above it, manages it, and rectifies it. So basically, there is the station of yaqadha, wakefulness, which he considers to be the first of all stations. because we're dead until we wake up. We are in this stupor of heedlessness until we wake up. Wake up means what? Yaqadha means what? Wake up to the purpose of your existence. Wake up and figure out why am I here? Because all of us are asleep, except for a few. All of us are dead or asleep or comatose or, bewildered, except for the few who are truly awake. Wakefulness, this yaqadha, is to basically wake up to figure out, recognize, realize why you are here, or be occupied, to be occupied by the purpose of your existence, to be concerned. To say to yourself, we're all here, we come here, and then we leave, we die, we go underground, and then what? And then you have to sort of think about what happens afterwards. Think about the afterlife and what you have to do for your afterlife. That's wakefulness, yaqadha. So he considers this to be the first station, the station of wakefulness. Everybody is dead until they start to be occupied by the purpose of their existence and what they're here for. Why am I here? Who brought me here? Why am I here? And where am I going? The answers to those questions. You must be occupied with answering those questions and working for the purpose of your existence. Now, after yaqadha, then the next yaqadha will be tafakkur, will be basically reflection. You will have to reflect. After you wake up, you reflect. And this reflection will guide you to the pleasures of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala and will guide you to al-Basira, the station of al-Basira, which is insight, enlightenment, true one, not basically in terms of the modern one. And I'm not opposed to the modern one. And I'm not opposed to rationality. I'm not opposed to advancement, technology, and all of that stuff. But all of that is in vain unless it is coupled with the true enlightenment of the heart. Because the mental one, the intellectual one, will not bring about happiness for humanity. It did not. It will not, unless the heart is enlightened as well. And the heart will never be enlightened until it seeks that enlightenment from the source, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. So now after you rise from one station to the next, and you become a person of reflection, tafakkur and tadabbur and so on, and you are endowed with some insight, should you forget about the station of wakefulness? Absolutely not. Absolutely not. Should you ever forget about the station of wakefulness? Absolutely not. You have to always go back. You transcend and transcend, or ascend and ascend, but you have to always go back and correct, rectify, improve, enhance, promote your wakefulness, your awareness of the purpose of your existence, your awareness of the transience of this life, your awareness of the nearness of the hereafter, your awareness, recognition, realization of God that should distract you from all else or anything else. So it is important that when you you understand this concept, that you should never think of yourself that you are beyond any of those stations. And I said that I will share something with you about al-Junayd rahimahullah. Ibn Taymiyyah rahimahullah used to always consider al-Junayd, call al-Junayd Sayyid al-Ta'ifa, But in Manāzil al-Sā'irīn, I have to share with you something that was the translator added here, a footnote that the translator, this is not part of the book, this is part of the introduction of the translator, and it's a footnote on the translator's chapter on the beliefs and teachings of Shaykh al-Islam al-Ansari. Apparently the translator is sort of respectful of Ibn Taymiyyah rahimahullah, he recognizes his status, but I think that he is to some extent misinformed about Ibn Taymiyyah's position concerning Sufism. You can, inshallah, I'll send you in the email a link to like some writings on this issue, including mine, and Dr. Anjum also does a good job in many places clarifying this misunderstanding, because he says here 200 years later, after Imam al-Ansari by 200 years, Imam al-Ansari died in the year 481 after Hijrah. Died in the year 481 after Hijrah. He was born at the end of the 4th century after Hijrah, and he died in the year 481 after Hijrah. So he says, the translator, he says, 200 years later, the renowned scholar Ibn Taymiyyah attacked Sufism and the Sufi masters by calling them deviators. He was a precursor of the Salafi movement, represented today by Wahhabism. The traditional masters of Sufism, including al-Ansari, have lost their appeal in certain Arab countries, except in some circles, but continues to be revered in Persian and Urdu-speaking countries among both Sunnis and Shiites. I think I think it's pretty misinformed. And if someone should speak for Ibn Taymiyyah should speak for himself. And I'll read this, and you'll find it also in my article on this issue. So when Ibn Taymiyyah was asked about, many imams and scholars of the past attacked Sufism, but you don't understand. The idea here is when we read their books, there are barriers between us and them. They did not write those books for the commoners, the public, the masses. Sometimes they would mention a term in the absolute sense, and they want it to be qualified. الذين قال لهم, Allah does this in the Quran. الذين قال لهم الناس وإن الناس قد جمعوا لكم فاخشوهم فزادهم إيمانا. Those, the people to whom the people said, the people gathered up against you. The people cannot be the same. It's all the people, the people, the people. It's not all the people, because it is impossible that some people were told, the people were told by the people that the people gathered up against them. So, الَّذِينَ قَالَ لَهُمُ النَّاسِ, those are the informants that came to the Sahaba and told them that an-nas, other people, the Confederates, the al-Ahzab, قَدْ جَمَعُوا لَكُمْ, they gathered up against you. So fear them. So sometimes the absolute may be mentioned and the qualified is intended. The absolute may be mentioned and the qualified is intended. So that this praise of Sufism has been, it did not start with Ibn Taymiyyah rahimahullah. It started much earlier, even from the time of al-A'imma al-Arba'a. Imam al-Suyuti rahimahullah, he talks about al-Izz ibn Abd al-Salam, and al-Izz ibn Abd al-Salam is Sultan al-Ulama, and al-Suyuti is a Sufi, and he talks about al-Izz ibn Abd al-Salam, and he said that al-Izz ibn Abd al-Salam first attacked so and so because of his because he used to see the Sufis from the spectacles of the fuqaha. So but the fuqaha have been traditionally averse not to the Sufis in the sense of tasawwuf, but to the turuqis that have deviated for the denominations, the groups that have clearly deviated from the path of Sharia and from the letter of the Quran and the Sunnah. So they asked Ibn Taymiyyah rahimahullah about the Sufis, and he said because of the disagreements over their ijtihads, people disagreed over their paths. A group condemned Sufism and said they are innovators who departed from the Sunnah, and that was reported from many Imams whose statements in this regard are known. A group of fuqaha and the scholars of kalam, speculative theology, followed them in this opinion. Another group exaggerated in their praise and claimed that they are the best of all creations and the most complete in virtue after the prophets. And the two extremes in judging matters are often flawed. The correct position is that they excel in obedience towards Allah like others excel. Some of them are among the vanguard, congruent with their effort, and some are average. So he says some of the Sufis are among the vanguard, sabiqun, congruent with their effort, and some are average among the people of the right hand, ahlul yamin. In both groups there are those who commit errors in their ijtihad, and some repent while others don't. Of them also are those who transgress themselves and disobey their Lord. And some groups of the innovators and blasphemous groups have attached themselves to them. However, they are not considered by the verifying scholars of Sufism to be of them. For example, al-Haj, the majority of the sheikhs of the Sufi orders rejected him and called him out of their path, like al-Junayd ibn Muhammad, Sayyid al-Ta'ifa, the master of the assembly, and others, as reported by Abu Abdurrahman as-Sulami in his Tabaqat al-Sufiyya. So when Ibn Taymiyyah critiques Sufism, he's critiquing practices, Sufi practices that were dominant in his time, that prevailed in his time, not using a broad brush, not stereotyping all Sufis, because some of the Sufis are great imams, some of the, some of the sabiqun, al-awwalun, and this indiscriminate labeling, this indiscriminate judging of, millions of people and using a broad brush to either praise them or critique them is just not reasonable. It is not rational. Things have to be broken down. Things have to be broken down. What are we talking about? Which Sufism are we talking about? Because it is vague. And I'll send you my article. I hope that it does provide some clarification in this regard. Because it is vague. We could be talking about union and unification, wahdat al-wujud and ittihad, which basically makes us, a whole lot worse than Christianity. At least Christianity said that there are thalathat aqanim, there is a Trinity, Holy Trinity. But if you believe in wahdat al-wujud, then you believe that we're all holy, because if you deny your existence as a creature, and you affirm the existence of only the Creator, you will end up being the Creator. Like al-Haj says, or al-Haj said, there is nothing inside the jubbah except Allah. Because it is basically this path of fana, which is vanishment or annihilation, that leads you to, if you deny your existence as a creature, if you don't basically identify, realize the difference, the great difference between the creation and the Creator, then we will be all gods, and there will be nothing but God. So eventually there is nothing inside here except God. And that is blasphemous. So is that the Sufi, or the Sufism of al-Junayd and Harith al-Muhasibi and Abdul Qadir al-Jilani and the great masters of the past that were righteous and they were compliant with the Sharia, with the Quran and the Sunnah? They will have mistaken ijtihads. Ibn Taymiyyah, Ibn al-Qayyim, Abu Hanifa, Shafi'i, Umar could have, not could have. There is no one infallible except the Prophet ﷺ. So Abu Bakr used to be debated with by the Sahaba. They used to debate with Abu Bakr over matters. If anyone is deserving of that status of infallibility after the Prophet ﷺ or short of the Prophet ﷺ, it would have been Abu Bakr. They used to argue with Abu Bakr. Umar used to argue with Abu Bakr all the time, we know that. But not only Umar, others used to do the same thing. So the problem is zeal. It is zeal. It is irrationality. When we love too much. When we hate too much. And we fail to look at things within reason. So that is basically the breakdown of this matter. And you'll find that it is particularly funny, the fact that when we read, and I'm not saying that our scholars are basically angels, and I'm not saying that our scholars did not commit mistakes, but there is a barrier between us and them. Because this translator thinks that Ibn Taymiyyah waged the war against Sufism. He did not. That's what Ibn Taymiyyah said about Sufism. When he broke it down, that is what he said about Sufism. All of his critique, and it does not mean that Ibn Taymiyyah's critique was always right. You have to keep this in mind also. He is also infallible. He's also fallible, human being. So the idea here is, but I believe, that most of it was correct. Most of it was against deviations, particular deviations, and he was pretty rational and reasonable in his critique. But when you read his critique, you come away with this impression. You come away, and it's not true. You come away with the impression that there was enmity. He is buried in the graveyard of the Sufis. Ibn Taymiyyah is buried in the cemetery of the Sufis in Damascus. And Ibn Taymiyyah used to be considered a Qadiri Sufi. His contemporaries used to be considered him a Qadiri. Ibn Taymiyyah, when he died, and this is almost funny, but before this, so I'm not blaming him, because sometimes when people fail to sort out the difference between the intellectual critique and the personal relationships, I could be very critical of some of your thoughts, but personally, I don't have except love for you. I love you, but I'm very critical of your thoughts. Can't you be extremely critical of your mother's thoughts sometimes? Many of you were at one point. But does that take away from the love you have for your mother? It doesn't take away from. So Ibn Qayyim one day came to Ibn Taymiyyah and said to him, he told him that one of his enemies had died. Ibn Qayyim is coming to Ibn Taymiyyah as if he was going to share glad tidings. That one of his staunch enemies, adversaries, people that used to always attack him, one of the sheikhs, a Sufi sheikh, that used to always attack Ibn Taymiyyah and attack his positions, died, and Ibn Qayyim came and rushed to Ibn Taymiyyah to tell him that he died. So Ibn Taymiyyah rebuked him, and he ran to the home of that person, and he extended condolences to his family, and he said to them, I am to you in his place. Anytime you need anything, just ask me or reach out to me. And he was very gracious, because he understands that these intellectual battles that we undertake are for the sake of the same deen that we're all trying to protect. for the sake of this very same deen that we are all trying to protect. One day, he was surrounded in a masjid in Egypt. And you know Egyptians, I'm Egyptian, so I have the right to say that. You should be sensitive to these issues. But I have the license. So Egyptians can sometimes be a little bit... I'm not going to say it. But anyway, so they called Ibn Taymiyyah in one of the masajid, people that were sort of adversarial to his teachings, and they beat him up very bad. So students and followers, and he was from Damascus, but he did live in Egypt for short periods of time. So some of his followers and supporters came rushing to him, and Sharafuddin, his brother, reports this story, and they said to him, give us permission and we will go and basically tear them apart and demolish their homes and so on. They knew where they were coming from, and they give us permission. And they go on foot and on horse and donkey and mule, everything, and they came with their swords, and they came well armed once they heard the news. He said to them, you would be sinners if you do this. They said to him, so his supporters said to him, you either right or they are right. One of you must be right. He said to them, they could have done this for the sake of Allah, and they will get rewarded for it. They will get rewarded for beating me. That's what he said. And you will now go out and beat them, and you will get punished. So they said to him, it doesn't make sense. Well, many people fail to understand this level of tolerance or understanding. This is their ijtihad. They felt that I am really deviant, so they beat me. They'll get rewarded. He said, they'll get rewarded. If that is truly their ijtihad, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala will judge them by their ijtihad. It is not that, and certainly they may get rewarded and punished at the same time because they transgressed or they did, things in excess. But he realized that yes, they could have beaten me and they could get rewarded, but you will be punished. And they said to him that we will not allow this to happen because it will embolden them. So Ibn Taymiyyah at the end said to them, you're either doing this for me, for Allah, for yourselves, or for yourselves. If you're doing this for Allah, then I am telling you that you will be held as sinners in His sight. If you're doing that, and He is most capable of avenging Himself. He said He is most capable of avenging Himself. If you're doing it for me, then I have forgiven them, I have pardoned them, so you have no business in this. And if you're doing it for yourselves, don't ask me. Don't seek my permission. So, and okay, yeah. And I will end up with the funny thing. The funny thing is that Ibn Taymiyyah used to be, somewhat very strict on excessiveness when it comes to, in treating righteous people and seeking blessings from touching the righteous people or touching their garments or their utensils, their tools, things of that nature. He used to think that this only belongs to Allah. But the funny thing is that many people did not agree with him over this. But when he died, his funeral was the largest funeral that Damascus had seen in that time. But when he died, So these are people that are opposed to his teachings concerning the tabarruk bis-salihin, so they didn't really buy into it. They were committed to tabarruk bis-salihin. When he died, they caught the water of his ghusl and drank it, and they used to, sort of fight over it to get a little bit of that water and drink it. And it was said that the thread that he had around his neck, where he had mercury, he was in jail for 2 years before he died. So they used to have like mercury attached to them to basically repel insects and lice away. Prisoners would have this to repel the lice away. The thread that was attached to him was sold for 150 dirhams. And the qalansuwa or taqiyya, or the cap that he was wearing, was sold for 500 dirhams. And this is all in Bidaya and Nihaya by Ibn Kathir, and so it's not like, Ibn Kathir is one of his students. So, and they used to throw their imamas, they used to throw his turbans to touch his nash, to touch his casket. So used to take off their turbans and try to touch by any piece of the turban his casket. And no one was left behind. No one failed to come out to his funeral unless they had an excuse, or they were not able to make it because of the crowdedness, because they could not, like it's around al-Haram. They were not able to make it because of the crowdedness. These are the people that did not really buy into some of his ideas. But it's like, so you think so, but we don't think that we cannot basically seek blessings this way, so we will do it to you, even though you did not think so. So the personal relationships, the fact that his janazah was attended, the number is somewhere between 60,000 to 200,000, but they said that this was basically all of the people that were in Damascus during this time, except for very few. 15,000 women attended his janazah. The number of women that attended his janazah is 15,000 women. Even it was said that women were allowed in to see his body before the washing, after he died. They threw the doors open of al-Qala, the citadel, and they allowed people in, and they allowed men first, and then they allowed women first after that. And then 15,000 women went out to his funeral. So it is extremely important, and the more we go into the details of this book and talk about Shaykh al-Islam al-Harawi, who basically defies this compartmentalization, this polarization, this divide, fictitious divides. So you must be Sufi, Ash'ari, the Madhabi, this, that, or you are Salafi and Athari, and this, and these, we will start to make these fictitious divides. Things were not divided like this. Things were not divided in this way. Shaykh al-Islam al-Harawi himself was a master of Sufism, and he was extremely opposed to Ash'arism, that he was excessive in his opposition to Ash'arism. He was, and this is one of the issues that he could be critiqued about. He used to actually make la'n of Abil Hasan, Imam Abu Hasan al-Ash'ari rahimahullah. Imam Abu Hasan is a great imam, and it is because of this keenness to basically fight for the deen and protect the deen. But the division, the lines that we put are actually lines, fictitious lines. And the intellectual discourse that was between them that we read about now, we are barred from understanding the depth of it, the breadth of it, and we think that on a personal level, these people used to be fighting each other, punching each other in the face, or torching each other's masajid, like some of us do nowadays, which was really not true for those great imams. Finally, if there were contentions between them, and if some of them were excessive in their critique of others, or in their adversarial behavior towards others, why do we follow them in these errors? Why don't we basically seek our conduct from the one who is infallible, sallallahu alayhi wasallam? And gentleness was prescribed in all things. And to top it off, reciprocation is important. In our times, people really emphasize the importance of the civil discourse, importance of political correctness. Should we Muslims lag behind? No, we should not. The very message that the Prophet ﷺ brought to Quraysh was not communicated in the same way to Suhail ibn Amr, al-Mut'im ibn Adi, Abu Talib, Abu Jahl, Umayyah ibn Khalaf, Abu Sufyan. These are all, aren't these all kuffar? They were unbelievers. They did not believe. Were they treated in the same way? Were they addressed in the same way? Wasn't al-Mut'im ibn Adi someone that the Prophet said, had he been alive, I would have freed the captives of Badr all for his sake, just as a compliment to al-Mut'im ibn Adi. He was not a Muslim. Abu Talib, Allah said about him, إِنَّكَ لَا تَهْدِي مَنْ أَحْبَبْتَ وَلَكِنَّ اللَّهَ يَهْدِي مَنْ يَشَاءُ. Allah said to the Prophet, you love him, but you can't guide whomever you love. Allah guides whomever He loves. So, not the same. So that the fact that the discourse itself could be very different means that our contemporary discourse should be also reciprocal with the rest of the people. We should reciprocate. The idea of reciprocation, even in our khutab, even when you talk about the Jews and Christians, try to be objective and matter of fact. You don't have to be offensive. There is no reason to be offensive. You could convey the message completely, honestly, without being offensive. The idea of reciprocation was best expressed by Abdullah ibn Abbas when he said, لو قال لي فرعون بارك الله فيك لقلت له وفيك. Had Fir'aun said to me, Barakallahu feek, I would have replied by saying, Wafiq, and may Allah bless you as well. That is Fir'aun. So all of this is extremely important for us to understand going forth. I will stop here because I'm way overdue, and inshallah we will finish on time.